kind of a crazy year. It's just been a lot of weird stuff, and we are sorting out the toolkits that we've paid for, and we're getting things together and starting to bring in some more money. And so 2024 is looking pretty good. We're not going to try to repeat something in the past, but based on what we believe we are capable of at this time, these are the development numbers, the income numbers that primarily Jenny and I, we've had these conversations with Whitney, Kate, Jocelyn, but Jenny and I and Jenny's talked with her team about what we see as being reasonable and realistic for next year, and we believe this is a doable deal, and this becomes our performance analysis, performance evaluation. Are we able to bring in this money? I don't see anything on there that I'm not confident we can do, with the possible exception of convention is just going to be whatever it is. It could be twice that, it could be half that, it depends on things that are going to be weird. But that we want to put on the kind of convention that will attract people and will attract donors. And so I believe that this is a realistic number. I do not feel bad about committing to bring that in. And Jenny's on board to bring that in this next year. And we'll know within, by the end of the first quarter how that's going, and we'll adapt and improvise as we need to. Hopefully we have stretch goals that are beyond this that I hope we'll hit, but this, I think we can do this. On the expense side, it is what it is. A lot of questions have been asked about certain line items. It's always a trade-off, between the money we pay for professional staff or for software platforms, toolkit stuff, and volunteer hours. And so, get what you pay for. This is the toolkit that we put together for our staff primarily, but also as we work on our volunteer recruiting and employment side, as Mike was talking about earlier. This is what we believe we need to be able to manage a large bank of volunteers that are doing active work. So I don't know that there's anything in particular that I want to call out there. If people have specific questions just about anything, I can take some of that. But really, for the most part, I mean, if it's a new question, otherwise it's let the debate begin. And y'all can start the decision-making process of honing in on this stuff. And you want to pass it as is, or do we need to rethink some stuff?
I don't know which one. Were you first?
John was first.
Okay. Wilbur is. I just also for the record, there is no motion on the floor.
So very simply, to get us kicked off to debate this, move the budget as presented.
I can sit down now.
Oh no. Of course,
Why are you getting back up?
Yeah.
There's going to be some requests for information.
You might have some questions answered.
Yeah.
Actually, you can say.
Nice try.
I tried. The name on the table.
This is a picture of you laying on the table.
There it is.
Okay, so Mr. Wilbur has moved this budget as presented. It has been seconded. Is there any objection?
Objection.
Okay. Mr. Wilbur, would you like to speak to your motion?
No. I would like us to debate this, but I think it's a good starting point.
Point of information, did you additionally move to authorize the expenditure zero?
Yes, I'm glad you heard that. You were very close to me, so that was good listening.
Thank you. Arthur's here with us in spirit.
He always is.
All right. Would you like to speak to your motion?
So it comes on the back of our request for information. Scrolling up, you look at the revenue boxes there. One of the things that I see, thank you, for under income there, is event revenue. In parentheticals is 30%. I'd like to understand if the numbers given there, 15,000 and 15,600 respectively, are represent net revenue or fully burdened revenue from those events, or if that is top-line gross revenue without considering the expenditures made for those events, and to inquire what 30% means.
That would be a paper.
Yeah.
That's,
So I'm the one who came up with 30% because when I did events prior to LP taxes, that kind of was, if I was doing a fundraiser for a nonprofit, it was 30% kind of the standard. That's your target goal that you're going to want to do, and it's going to be net. So it's going to be 30%, and then, so you take all your revenue, you take out your expenses, and then you should be getting 30% of what you spent. And that's just a standard target that most people in nonprofit fundraising wants to try to hit.
30% return on expenditures.
Right.
I wanted to make sure that we weren't banking on 30% cost.
No, and the 30% being in parentheses, please remember, anything that's in parentheses is not in concrete.
Right.
It's just a suggestion, kind of like when you see authorized under website payment gateway. That is going to be the line item. The parentheses and authorized is just to tell you that that is one of our providers that that expense goes into that line item, and we could be not using authorized and using, Stripe Express.
So at 30%, $15,000 net off of 30% means $50,000 gross. And is $50,000 gross revenue in keeping with what we've delivered over the rolling last 12 months, or do we have sort of a historical analog in inflation corrected from previous cycles around this time, where we can say that we're confident that we're going to produce $50,000 in gross revenue at those events? If we are, then great. That takes care of my question and potential objection.
Go ahead, I don't want to answer that question right now about what I have to do with this analysis.
Yeah, there's what my thinking is on the subject. Again, we have people are contributing to the decision making. Is that it's partly inflation, but it's also we are fine tuning as we go with the staging of these events, and in addition to these two large fundraisers that we do, I'd like to see us doing some more outreach type fundraiser events, kind of dinner with share kind of stuff like that. And so I believe it's a realistic number. If we're not making that, then we're probably not spending it either. So it's,
It doesn't feel like an outlandish number.
Yeah.
My question was, okay, 30% on their side, and so now that you've answered that, have we produced $50,000 in gross revenue from events over the last 12 months to know that we can produce that much revenue, gross revenue?
The treasurer's report shows we produced 22.8 in 3 quarters this year alone.
So we feel pretty comfortable at 50.
No, 15. It's 15.
Oh, okay, yeah. What was that? But was that number in the treasurer's report? Was that net or gross?
That's gross.
That's gross. And so
it is this
we would
budget
net
gross.
30% of that. So what we're talking is a significant increase in projected gross revenue in order to meet the $15,000 net that we're targeting.
The 30%.
well, that's one.
Yes, it's not necessarily correct. Something you said about, I heard generous share. I think what you were calling that event was, I think you maybe meant it was more of a development activity where in terms of donor cultivation.
Yeah.
There are, in order to try to get big donations, the chair spends time with.
No, that's not events.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, that's why I just want to clarify the word. Yeah.
I do have a point of information whenever.
Okay, so I have,
There's an order point back there.
yes, there's a queue.
But there's plenty of information with the trumpet, right?
Pardon me?
It's a point of information. It's not a comment. It's a question. It piggybacks off of.
Well, the problem is, a lot of times when people start asking questions, like requests for information, it turns into debate. And if you want to debate, then you have to.
I promise you it's not debate.
Okay.
Is $15,600 in the 2023 budget listed for event revenue, is that a gross figure? Or is that a net figure including expenses related to those events? Because if this was printed out in QuickBooks, I would assume it's a gross figure and that the expenses related to those events will be somewhere else under expenses. But it sounds like y'all were saying it's net.
It's gross. No, you're right, it is gross.
That figure is gross.
Okay.
It is gross.
Then yes.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay, so that's gross. All right. Okay, so if those are gross, then are the expenses related to those events captured below under expenses? If they are, then great, answers my question.
Yes, they are.
Okay, great.
Ms. Gibbs?
Okay, I had a specific line item question, like in this budget, about under comps, obviously, because, I need to see exactly what it says. On the stock photos from Adobe, what exactly does that entail? Because, like, how many licenses per month or stuff like that? Like, what is that $400 a month getting the communications department?
Yeah, here we go.
Would you like me to answer? Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Off the top of my head, I can't give you an exact number, but it wasn't much, and it isn't mine from Adobe. I did put out there those are the prices from Adobe, but it really wasn't a lot of photos and a lot of video time. It was something like 10 hours per month or whatever it was for video. It was a very low amount for the stock photos as well. There were other platforms I hoped to talk to you guys about, we just didn't have time. That offers a significant more amount of photo downloads per month.
Does it include commercial licenses
Yes,
versus personal?
yes. That one includes everything. That was their nice package from Adobe.
Okay.
Mr. Wood?
Yeah, so before I say the question, a few assumptions that are going into this. One is that we will have some kind of change in treasurer between this term and next term. And the other is that you will be in some kind of leadership moving forward in the next term. With those two assumptions in mind, is it your belief, with you presenting this budget, for what you think the party should move forward with, that our current accounting policies are in line with our practices and should continue, or do we need updates to those to account for how this budget is supposed to be reflected?
A personal project, and Jocelyn and I discussed this, is to actually pretty much reformat. It's not case deal, it's legacy stuff that has been handed down. And we've been going through some interesting stuff, but as time permits and when we can pull off a pretty significant project, then I would like to reformat our chart of accounts and revise some of our accounting policies so we can have a better picture.
So with that in mind, should we look at the budget being presented through the lens of our current policies, or is there some other lens we should be examining these through? So,
I don't know. I'm not saying I don't know. I'm saying I started to say something else, and then no, I don't think there's a different lens.
so
you know.
we should consider this under the current policy?
Yes.
Okay.
Change.
Mr. Bradley?
Billy got my question.
Oh, okay, thank you. Ms. Burns?
I didn't have
For the budgeted line items, regardless of which department it's for, do we know which one of those items would require an upfront cost if it's technology, or something that can be done month to month if we are in the process, or if we are going to be looking for alternatives to some of the higher cost technologies? I don't know if that came out clear enough.
I mean, not for me.
Sorry, all right, so we budgeted, for example, this is on operations right now, email services, G Suite. We talked about that one before, so maybe there's an alternative to that. I believe we're currently paid up or contracted through this April of next year is what was set. $2,500. Is that something that's going to be allocated and spent right away, or in April, or if we come up with an alternative that's a significantly lower cost, where's that delta going to go?
Staff is always, staff is always looking at, always willing to look at cost-effective alternatives. But I, for our purposes here, I would say, assume that this is the way it's gonna go next year, like that we stick with, for instance, the G Suite tools.
I think the question is,
I
the
think
question,
may I try to clarify?
yeah.
Please.
I think what you're asking is, do these numbers reflect an expense that we expect for the entire year of '24, regardless of whether we stick with what we're doing or we change to something that hopefully would be less expensive? So I would say that these reflect like a maximum based on what we've been doing and potentially what we would want to switch to, where we can save money but also get quality services and products.
So the additional clarification, there was a second part of that, I thought that was very, very important. He's like, because I'm looking at that as, okay, say we change out our email provider and save $2,000. Where does that money go? I think was also part of your question.
Okay. Yes,
if I heard it correctly.
I was getting to. The second part of your question is, if in the event we do switch to something that requires an upfront cost, or is that what you're saying? Like,
No, so.
how would this change if we do switch to something that requires an upfront?
Not that it requires a upfront cost, but so I'm just using the G Suite as an example, since we really can't replace that until it expires. I guess we could, but it's an additional cost. But when G Suite does expire, I'm expecting that $2,500 to be the renewal cost for G Suite. So if we find an alternative that is $300 or $500, where does the additional $2,000 that's been budgeted for go? And then also point of clarification, does putting the product or the technology on the budget lock us into only spending money on that?
Already explained that.
No, it does not. And to answer your question, is I think you're concerned about like if we do switch to something else, there might be overlap costs, right? And then also you're saying if we switch to something else and it doesn't cost us as much as what we budgeted, what we would actually come back and do is amend the budget to reflect, here's the change we made. We don't need this much money in here anymore, and we can adjust it. This body can do that at any point.
What's most likely to happen is that it would just be unspent money, and it would continue to reflect in the reporting that we didn't spend all of our budget that year, unless and until, for instance, let's say something discretionary came up and comps had already tapped out their operations, had already topped out their discretionary budget, and there might, but all of that would be recruited to SLEC. Like if we wanted to try to use that for something else, it would have to be moved in the budget to a different line to be used for something else. Otherwise, we just get to the end of the year and we say, hey, look how much money we saved on email or whatever.
With regard to your asking about the parentheticals here, maybe something that we could do that's not already there is just an asterisk somewhere that says whatever is in parentheses indicates current providers. So that gives us that, as of the date that this budget was adopted, those are the providers being used, so that we're not locked into that specifically in case we do change. And then we wouldn't have to come amend it necessarily, officially. Yeah, anything for that. Mr. Wilford.
Madam Chair, I have a hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Westbrook.
No, it's okay, go ahead. Mr. Wilford.
Mr. Wilford has spoken a lot today, so if you want.
Speaking
To
of
all our
SLEC,
benefit.
he's making up.
You can breathe some more. I think you're not spinning that already. Mr. Wilford, are you okay? I did.
I defer, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
So the first thing, with your comments, I guess instead of making a formal amendment of the process, I would just request the secretary note in the minutes that that our discussion noted that the parentheticals reflect current vendors. And secondly, I think we had a rather disappointing outcome on our budget versus actual for this last year, this year we're currently in. Given our current bank accounts, what would you say is the potential losses we can afford to incur for the coming year if things are to continue to not go our way?
Are you saying, if I may, how much can we stand to lose and still keep doing the things?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. Yeah. And I guess to further emphasize, and how does that compared to our current bottom line number, which is not a small one.
Yeah, it's the size of that.
Because they've gone from a $1.3 million budget.
I'm arguing that point. I'm just saying.
I'm going to answer the question I think I heard, but I don't, because I don't have a specific, I have some theories about what would be pull the ripcord now before we hit the ground kind of number.
Sure.
But that, anything I would say would be an abstraction for the guests, and we've already about that.
We're in charge of it all.
What I would say is very much on my mind is that I'm taking the first quarter.
Point of parliamentary inquiry. I feel like this is very important, and we're getting a lot of cross chatter in here.
I and the rest of the staff, but this me coming out of our budget conversations and looking what we're committing to doing, have set the first quarter, and then by that point we'll be up to our elbows in convention prep, and the convention gala is a significant fundraising event. Last couple of weeks of April, post convention, after everybody gets some sleep, then that's going to be the time to, with the new SLEC, I guess, address. We will see systems coming online. We'll see, nation builder doing what's designed to do. We'll see development,
So
results finding where we want, and we'll have to deal with it at that time.
So you put together, I think, a very reasonable point for us to reassess. But you alluded to something that I'm quite interested in. You said a number to pull the ripcord on. And I didn't necessarily hear what that ripcord number was. Where
Not specifically, did say. Yeah.
There's ongoing evaluation.
What I can tell you strategically, and keep this in mind as you're considering how we do the different line items and what you think is really important to do with it. Yes. I think there is a sense in which organizations have vital systems that once they start to shut down, then you're in deep trouble. But there is what I'm talking about pull the ripcord would be just a general. I would resign for one thing.
It's a tough decision. No, it's not.
Yeah, it's going to be time to cut the expenses to match the income.
Yeah.
And that would, the biggest chunks we have are my salary, the software platforms, and we'll be back at all volunteer, and we'll get what we get,
Yeah.
But so we're taking it very seriously on the development side.
Mr. Mason.
So what I have to say kind of fits into what we're talking about in a way, but it just came to my attention within the last 24 hours that our chair is doing a lot of traveling and doesn't even have an expense account to do that on. It's paying for travel and other things on their own, and personally, I think that makes us look really, really bad. So the question is, and I'm assuming at this juncture, or I would have put it out there beforehand, but I'm assuming at this juncture it's kind of too late to be, making any changes to the budget. But I guess I'd like to make a statement. I beg your pardon?
We can amend.
You can amend.
It's not right.
Okay, but at any rate, I guess what I would like to say is I'd like the staff to take a close look at what we can do to fix that problem in the future for future budgets. I don't know that in reality we can do that where we are now. I would bow to your expertise, and I mean your staff expertise, to say whether that's a reasonable thing, especially from a treasurer standpoint. If that's something we can do, but I think we need to fix that problem. That's all.
Mr. Burns?
I just want to kind of make something clear that doesn't seem to be fully clear in the room. So with these budgets, we're setting a maximum for these departments for these expenses. This is us saying these departments can only spend up to this amount, until we authorize more. If you end up needing more in the year, you're going to have to come to SLEC and explain it, make a motion, but get the vote you need, get it passed, and get yourself more money. We went through this with the events department and the fundraisers, and they needed more money. Well, how much have you brought us? Well, a lot. Well, okay, here's more. We can change this stuff anytime we want, really.
Right.
But this is the once a year time where we go, okay, let's really take a hard analysis of what we did last year, what we've done in years past, and make a prediction about what our expenses are going to be. And I would say, not to commit the logical fallacy of appeal to authority, but as an accountant, expenses are pretty easy to predict. I mean, you've got receipts. Income is not. Income is a crystal ball, especially for this, because this is no business that we can tie standards to. So, I mean, as individuals, I would take a hard look at those numbers and decide for yourself, do we think we can predict this? Is this a safe budget? But again, ultimately, like he said, you can pull the ripcord at any time you see fit. So this isn't on staff, this is on us. This is what our job is to monitor this and to watch this. And if we have questions, we ask the treasurer. You know, a lot of times we rely on Kate because she's the treasurer, but the reality is she's the reporting person. She's the accountant that follows it. It's not really her job to tell you how to vote or to tell you what is financially conservatively acceptable for your particular constituents. It's our job as individuals to look at these numbers hard and to make our decision for ourselves as to what we think is the correct budget for this part. And to follow it through the year such that when it starts going off the rails, we start going in the red, take a hard look at it and go, hey, do we need to adjust some things here? Are we not hitting our income predictions that we thought we would make? You know, that last legal fundraiser went 30 instead of the 50 we thought. Now we don't have 20 grand. What are we going to do? And so throughout the year, we can do that. And at any time, we can cut expenses and budgets, but most of the time we can't just whip out an extra 30 grand. So we need to be paying more attention to income than we do to expenses, in my opinion. That's my opinion only. But having sat through several of these budget meetings, we always tend to focus on these expenses, and we get lost in the weeds on this 4,000, that 2,000. And I want to know, how are we going to make 160,000 when last year we made 100, as an example. I'm not saying that's happening here, but I just want an overall picture to help you kind of understand what you're aiming at, what you're looking for.
Are you asking how SLEC numbers are going to help raise money?
Well, that would definitely be a part of it.
Mr.
But he's
Coogan
right.
and Mr. Pierce.
So, right
I'm
on,
sorry, Mr. Burns.
right on top of Joe, I 100% agree with everything he says. And so my question really is around the financials. You know, the SLEC has a portion of fundraising, but it's really the counties that are driving sustaining members. And do we have the ability to look at sustaining members per county in growth year over year? And like you would any sales force, I mean, the county chair is the guy you're going to see. Do we have the ability to manage that income in some way, right? There's the special events, right? And big donors, we can go badger Ginny all day long, but the reality is the county chairs are going to create the income.
And we've done a lot in the past several budgets to get more, and we've made great strides, and yet there is more to do. I mean, how many county chairs go out and try to fundraise with other counties for the state party? There's a lot more we can do, and we're getting it. But we need membership, we need growth. It all works together.
Yeah, and I'm used to doing budgets, again, using your logical fallacy and the authority. Right? I'm off by $1 million, right? But stuff is going to change next year. It's going to change next year, and you got to reflect.
Mr. Coogan, are you?
That was it.
Okay, thank you.
Unless someone wants to think.
All right, so request for information, and I'll have a motion. My request for information is for the chair. When you have to travel to execute the business of this party, you pay for that travel yourself, do you have to claim that as a donation in kind? Or do we have to claim that as a donation in kind from the money that you spend on your own travel to execute? Okay. And do you have an estimate of how much you've spent in an active quarter on travel and expenses in order to execute the will of this party?
I do not for this one. But I do not for this one. It is, it's just not something that, I mean, I obviously think about it, but it's not something that I can track of. And now that you say that, though,
I think you can. That's the reason I asked.
Anyway, no, I do not. I don't have that number. If you really want it, I can go back and.
So with the lack of that number, I'll just have to shoot from the hip.
Okay, hold on. You get over your box here. I will say that while I haven't done this on a regular basis, I think there is discretionary line that I could potentially pull out on that already exists. So
All
and
right.
I
So
also
we've supported you.
what line is that?
Discretionary.
Just the discretionary.
Mr. Pierce has the floor. Mr. Pierce has the floor.
Okay, great. So that discretionary line there, just below staff compensation, that's that line that you would be allowed to pull from?
No.
Request for information.
Yes.
Hang on a second. We've got multiple people here.
Yes.
Ms. Wilford, is this related to this conversation? Okay.
Yes, and if you roll that up, this, where it says executive, right here.
Okay.
That's the leadership discretionary, the compensation, that's mostly what you pay, I go through it, but, so that's officers and leaders.
That's great.
So the point of information that I have is just a clarification that the discretionary spending is not explicit to the chair, and that is generally used for any lapses that happen in events or services that we contract to, and various other line items that maybe weren't incidental costs get found from, or things that come up at the last minute, things like sudden expenses to our legal team and whatnot. They get spent from the discretionary spending under the XD plus officers section. That is not explicitly for reimbursing the chair for the expenses that they incur for furthering the purposes of the party.
Thank you for that clarification. So I will go ahead and make my motion. I move to amend the proposed
Point
budget.
of order, Madam Chair. I believe we had a request for information up here.
Request for information.
Is that possible?
Yes. For the traveling that the chair does, would that be considered outreach?
It could be considered outreach, it could be considered development. I think it depends on each activity and what I'm actually going to do. Or what the chair is actually going to do. So it depends.
I think that if you'll allow me to make my motion, that when you can speak to or against the motion that I'm going to make and include requests for information on the back of this motion, but the motion will be out there for consideration. If y'all give me an opportunity to go ahead and make my motion.
Here.
All right. So I move.
That's the procedure.
Yep. I move to amend the proposed budget to include $3,500 for executive committee travel expenses.
Define executive committee because this
Yeah,
is
that-
Great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well taken. Party officer travel expenses.
Point of information.
request for information?
Request for information. So we have, before we get into that, adding a monetary line to this, I do have a question about the budget that would play into this. We are, for our budget, are expecting $193,000 of income in this next year, based off of the decreases we've seen this year. Is $193,000 an attainable number that we should expect to make? Or is that just a number that we're hoping that we make? Because I think if we're not expecting to make $193,000, we shouldn't be adding budget line items to this.
That's an answer. That's an answer to that.
Yeah, I'll take it again though. I want to be clear. If this wasn't clear enough in the first thing I said, then I want to make sure it's crystal clear. I don't want to overcompensate this year because we had a bad year. The same way we overcompensated last year because we had 2 years. Like in other words, there's there is the heart of the matter is we're looking at next year, what's reasonable for next year. 2024 is even year, elections, gala, at the convention. It's going to be more like 22 than 23. And we have systems coming online now that actually work as opposed to the crap we used last year. And we have Secret Weapon Joe Burns back in Texas. So yeah, this is our realistic goal that we expect to make. We will be aiming to bring in more. So I want to be able to come back like in about August and say we need to increase the line item for development commission because Jenny's bringing in so much money that we need Paris.
Yes. Here, we have a motion to
Objection.
Yes, thank you. And someone has already asked a question about it. Mr. Woodford, would you like to, actually, do you need to speak any further to your?
Nope.
Mr. Woodford?
Yeah, and if you would, Bill, so understand that for this one. I think this is awesome. I think it's a great conversation we're having. I think it needs to happen. Speak from personal experience, having been chair and having been treasurer. This is well overdue. I have made plenty of expenses for this party, both in kind, and particularly, I'll name one. When I was treasurer, we were going to lose our executive director, and I canceled my recurring donation and wrote a $2,000 check to the party to keep paying their paycheck. I don't think people realize right now what being an officer in this party means, both in time commitment and money commitment. So I think there's probably a question in this body, why am I objecting? If I feel so strongly about this, why am I objecting? We need to think this out. We need more information, and this needs to be a whole policy. I'll give you one example of what I think is 100 and why just making this motion on the fly is a bad idea. Right now, if somebody was to expense their gas mileage, which there is a from one place to another. Huh?
65.
65, I'm sorry, I was lowballing it. 65 cents a mile. And I think we would go broke paying our officers 65 cents a mile for their travel. I think we need to come up with a realistic policy that reflects what people actually spend and is a reimbursement policy in advance of a way to make money. Because I'm going to tell you, when I was treasurer, I was not only left with a bunch of broken records and missing data, I was also left with literal boxes of receipts. And included in those receipts was a former chair who I will not name, and a bunch of check stubs to their wife.
Yep.
And we all asked a bunch of questions about why those checks were there, and there was no policy or guidance on why they were given. Maybe they were given in full faith to try and reimburse real expenses. We don't know that. But it looks suspicious. So I'm going to ask this body to hold off, vote down this motion, and take it to the forum where we can develop a real policy around this, but I do think we should do it ultimately. So thank you.
Mr. Westbrook, and I have a date. You were online.
My question is for Mr. Wilford. Mr. Wilford, isn't it possible if we were to say, okay, for this 3,500, which I think is exceptionally low, but that's either here or there, at least we're making some progress. Isn't it possible for the staff to immediately then say, okay, we have this budget item, we need to establish a policy for how we're going to spend this money?
I'm going to answer this and actually pass it on to the chair.
Okay.
I think not giving guidance on what this money means and just putting it out there creates more of a problem for the officers than it does a solution.
Yes.
Will you?
Yes.
Okay.
Fair
enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Kate, you next, and then I'm going to be on the list.
Sure. So I agree with John on this one wholeheartedly. Just being a current officer, we know what we're getting into when we decide to run. You know what's expected of you, and I do more than that. You know, I'm also like one of the top individual donors in the party on top of putting all my time and effort and travel out there. And there's already things out there. There's discretionary, which we have in the past discussed that, but I think that was as a need. I think that a policy would be fantastic before we do a line item. I think this needs to go to the forum where there's more discussion, there's more things to fill things out and get more detail in it. I absolutely think we need to protect our funds, our officers, and our people. I think the motion is in very good spirit. But, you know, the road to hell is paved in good intentions, right? So I agree with John on this one. I'd also like to say something to piggyback earlier when we were talking about, you know, oh, it's the counties that need to raise money, or it's the people in SLEC that need to raise money. People, we all need to freaking raise money, and I'm tired. No, seriously, I'm going to get on my soapbox right now. The past 2 years, I have heard everybody who's come up here, including myself, well, maybe not so much more myself, but I've heard people in conversations passing that responsibility off to somebody else. Your butt is in this seat, you should be raising money. Period. You've got a title if you've got a title with an LP Texas, whether it's county, whether it's in his state, you should be raising money. Period. We'll stop. I'm done.
Okay.
I do have one request for information. Report information. Go ahead.
Yes, it is correct. We all know what we're getting into. I hope that we all know what we're getting into. This is an expensive volunteer activity. I pay to do this job. A shitload of money.
Yeah.
And not just me, the chairs before me have done the same. Okay, and I will tell you, as we've seen, the more we do, we have done more in the last 3 years, in my 2 terms, than I saw before. That is not a dig at previous chairs. This is just how much activity we're involved in on a regular basis. And the more we do, the more we are expected to do. And we cannot relent. We cannot backslide. We cannot stop doing it. We have to keep pressing forward. Having said that, we cannot continue to run an organization professionally and play in the big leagues like we think we're ready to do or we want to do and not have paid or at least somehow compensated chair position. Can't. Can't do it nationally either, frankly. Years ago, I tried to get the LNC to consider a paid chair position. There is a very controversial thing. Finally, legacy chairs, people who have been chairs for years and years and years, I went to them, they weren't even on the LNC anymore, asked them what they thought. Because when this kind of thing came up in the past, everybody was like, absolutely not. It'll create a weird environment, it'll draw, crazy, unqualified people out just for the money, whatever.
And the chair is always reluctant to speak on it.
What's that?
The current chair is always reluctant to speak on it.
Correct. However, the current chair at the time that I proposed it was Nicholas Harwar, and he said absolutely not. So, for what that's worth. But I will tell you that as time went by, and I brought that back up again a few years ago, even the LNC was looking at this going, you know what? We're at a place now where we need to be having this conversation. Because if we think we're ready to go play this game, and do the things that we're doing and be present in everybody's face all the time, every day, we have to start doing that. We have to professionalize in that way. It isn't just, and we've taken a huge step by having a full-time paid executive director. It's been a long time since we did that.
No. I do withdraw my second.
Okay.
I still have
To set us forward on the process of making it a policy, we should
the ebb and flow that you see in this type of thing. But I would agree with everything Whitney said. And I also